Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast with me, your host, Christy Houle. And on today's episode, I will be talking with Antwaun Thompson, or Coach T, as he likes to go by. Coach T has coached and mentored young men and women, helping to improve their athletic skills, confidence, resiliency, life skills experiences, and focus for over 30 years. Nothing brings him more satisfaction than seeing the heart, determination, and commitment from young people. Coach T is the founder and executive director of JLT Fieldhouse, a 501c3 nonprofit youth coaching and mentoring organization dedicated to coaching and mentoring the leaders of tomorrow. He is also the CEO of Coach T's Corner, an online mentoring academy that is designed to educate, motivate, and support our future leaders of tomorrow through personal growth and development and personal relationship development programs. Welcome to the show, Coach T. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and any opportunity I get to talk about my passion, I am all in.
All right, so let's dive in because I want our listeners to know a little bit about you, a little bit about your background, and kind of what led you to some of the work that you're currently doing.
Absolutely. My journey and my story leads back to what I do now, and it all starts when I was really young. My mom and my older brother and I were in a not so healthy situation. My biological father was not a very good father, nor was he a good husband to my mom. And my brother and I were really young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, and she knew that she deserved a better future and a better life, and so did my brother and I. So she left our biological father, and she then met this young Marine who she fell in love with, and they got married. And the first thing he did after he got married was he adopted my older brother and I, officially changing our last name, and that's the name that I am so proud to carry, and that's the Thompson name. And my father served 30 years in the United States Marine Corps and served 2 tours of Vietnam, and unfortunately we lost him to leukemia in 1996 from his exposure to Agent Orange when he was serving in Vietnam. And for years I'd looked for a way to honor what he stood for and what he taught my brothers and I. And the one thing I came up with was probably the perfect thing, and that was starting JLT Fieldhouse, which is named after my father, Joe Louis Thompson Fieldhouse. It's because I'm doing exactly what he did for my brother and I, and that's providing us the skills, the morals, the values, and the responsibility and accountability to be men, successful men, and most importantly, giving back when you get the opportunity. And that's what's led me here today.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about the work that you're doing with JLT Fieldhouse and some of the things that you're bringing to organizations and kids.
Yes. So what we do at JLT Fieldhouse is we have one-on-one. It's a basketball coaching and mentoring organization. So we do one-on-one training. We do group clinics. We do summer camps, summer league, and then we have special events. But the most important part of that is throughout each one of those different parts of our programming, we're talking about life skills, and we're adding life skills and talking about the comparisons between life and sports. And what you do in sports carries over to what you do in life. And you with 3 boys, you totally understand what I mean by that. Teamwork, accountability, responsibility. And one of the biggest rewards is like with the summer league. I'm the only adult that's a part of our summer league. All of the coaches for the summer league are high school students that are in our program, and they're coaching the younger kids, which are our 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade kids. And what's great about that is we have coaches and mentors coaching and mentoring. So it brings everything full circle, and this is probably the highlight of the reason JLT Fieldhouse was started.
So it sounds like you guys are doing some phenomenal work now with the mentoring and the coaching. And, obviously we all know it's kind of getting to be a conversation that we've all had a bazillion times about the pandemic and COVID and all these things. But the question that I want to ask you specifically about the work that you're doing is, I know that during the pandemic, a lot of that sort of probably fell off, right? Because you weren't able to get out and the kids weren't able to get out and everybody was in quarantine on and off and the schools were in and out. Have you noticed a decline in students being able to bounce back from that? Or have you noticed that since, we're kind of going back to normal as far as being in in-person school settings and folks being back out and not being, so confined, that you're noticing that it's harder to get kids back to what we consider being normal, or that you're noticing that they are raring and ready to go?
It's a great question. It's actually been a mixture, and I'll tell you why. Before the pandemic, our participation was really high because we were really getting the kids that wanted to get better skill wise from the skill set standpoint. We had a higher participation there. Since the pandemic, our participation is good, but the thing that's been a telling factor is been more of the kids that are committed to improving, to get to play at the next level, if that makes sense. So the private lessons have continuously, they fill up constantly. That's not a problem at all. The biggest thing that's fallen off is the group settings that we typically used to have, and we haven't done them since the pandemic has kind of relaxed some of the restrictions. But to answer your question, yes, there has been some fall off, but there's also been some kids that have been raring to get back into it. And one of the things we've done is added what I call an invitational open gym. And that's for those that do take regular lessons and give them the opportunity to get the extra work.
Do you see that as being something that, because that's something that kind of concerns me as an educator and as a parent, of boys, especially boys. Does that concern you at all, that we are seeing sort of a decline, or do you have the hopes that, okay, we just need a little bit more time and we'll start to see more of an influx of the boys being physical and getting back out there?
Oh, it's a major concern, and I think you're absolutely right. There's reason to be concerned because of the pandemic. The kids that start, it doesn't take them long, to get accustomed to something in new environments. And over the last 2 years, it's been a lot of, well, I can't go to the gym, I can't go to the field, so I'll just kick back and hang out with friends, or I'm on my computer or on my phone. It's hard to break that habit because they've gotten overly comfortable with it, and parents are trying to get their kids more active, and they're kind of pushing that off a little bit. So I think that it is a major concern because it's going to require people like you and myself and others to make sure that we get these kids to understand it's really important that they get back to being active.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, it's also too, wouldn't you agree, about making our kids somewhat uncomfortable sometimes in a very loving way? Because, my oldest son, he really got into the video game slump and all that. And although he didn't want to get back out there and start being active and be involved in team sports, I kind of had to nudge him and push him and make him uncomfortable enough to get him to form habits. So what kind of advice or strategies do you have for parents that need to sort of make their kids uncomfortable?
Oh, yeah. The word uncomfortable is so important because it's actually one of the first things, one of the words I use for kids when they come through the door. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable in order to get better. So to use the situations you're talking about, the kids have to be uncomfortable to be willing to break the old habits or break the new habits and get back to the old habits, which is getting back out. For instance, in my situation, I've actually had parents reach out to me and say, Coach, can you add some time in your schedule so I can get so and so back in the gym so I can get them active? So parents are recognizing that, to your point. And for us, it's create the opportunities for them to come out. And we have to be proactive in doing that. And I think parents have to be proactive and not so much push them out. It's all about making the recommendations, but also you got to find the support systems that are going to follow up on those recommendations. So if it's coming from you, if your son's just kind of hanging out and I'm like, hey, Coach T, reached out and said he wondering when you're going to get back in the gym. Now it's mom wants to be back in the gym. Coach T wants to be back in the gym. Hey, maybe I better get back in the gym. Those are the kind of tactics that parents have to use, but it's really about support, and that's the most important thing. And I don't want parents to feel so they have to push their kids, because you don't want to fracture that relationship or the relationship that they're building with their kids.
So in what you're saying, it kind of makes me think of like two different types of kids, right? So you've got the kids that they come to you, their parents reach out to you, they get involved with one of your groups or one of your events or activities, and they're gung ho. You've got these kids that are like, woohoo, loving life. They're physical, they're athletic. Those are the easy kids, right?
Right.
Those are the kids that want to be there. Those are the kids who's, they look forward to being with you. Then you've got the other camp of kids that are maybe a little bit more resistant. possibly don't want to be there at all, but their parents have really reached out to you and they're really struggling. And the kid shows up resistant, not wanting to be there, not a believer that's the kid who thinks there's nothing wrong with sitting and playing video games all day and eating junk food. So how do you push, and I don't want to say convince, but kind of convince those kids, those really, really difficult, resistant kids, to really jump in and start changing their life?
You have to ask questions, Christy. One of the most important things for me is, in order to help kids, you got to get answers from them, and they're not always going to be open to giving you answers when you ask questions. So it's about building that rapport, and it doesn't happen overnight. But you have to ask a question. For me, the first question is, what are you wanting to do in the next year? I want to get to next grade. Okay, great. What are you going to do? What do you want to do in 2 years? Well, I want to graduate. Okay, yeah, great. What are you going to do after you graduate? I want to do this. Well, you know what? Those are short-term goals that you have to start applying for yourself. And then that in turn leads to what your long-term goals are. So asking those questions is all about making them start to think a little bit about where they are, where they want to go. And that's is one of the other situations. They say, where have you been? They tell you where they've been. I say, where are you now? Well, I'm just kind of getting back into, or trying to get back to some sense of normalcy. Well, what are you willing to do? We all know what you're capable of doing, but my question to you is, what are you willing to do to get back to that and to be the best version of yourself, or to not only meet your expectations, but to exceed your own expectations? Asking the questions, not open-ended questions, but questions that lead to dialogue. Dialogue is where results happen. And I think, to your point, you can coerce kids to a point to where they start to kind of tune you out if you push too much. But if you get a support system around that is going to be encouraging, and by taking information that's given to them, and then I hate to use the term, but I'll say regurgitate that information, then you go back to them, and now you're on the same level field with them. My experience is I've seen tremendous results with that approach. And it's about being persistent, but it's also being positively persistent and not overbearing.
So the things that you're talking about really lend themselves to relationship building. And I want you to talk to us a little bit about how important in your role, a lot of our listeners are teachers, parents, a lot of our listeners are homeschool parents, coaches, educators, school administrators. And unfortunately, in the last several months, I've seen an influx on social media of videos of teachers just losing their, not being able to build relationships with kids, not being able to have that connection with them, and finally just losing it. So how important is the relationship piece in encouraging students to grow in all areas? Because I know you work on all areas, not just athletics, right, and physical. But how important is the relationship with this child, and how do you keep yourself in check when faced with difficult situations with kids, especially preteens and teens, which is the type of students and kids that you deal with a lot?
So you're absolutely right. Building relationships with the kids is the most important part, because that you're not going to get to point B if you can't achieve point A, and point A is building a rapport. And I think teachers know, and I want to preface that by saying I applaud everything that teachers and educators are going through at this point, because it truly has pushed them to the brink, because a lot of what they're going through is through no fault of their own. They've been dealt the situation that they're having to make the most of, and that's totally unfair. But at the same time, it's exactly why people like myself and a couple others that I know, or several other people I know, do what we do, is to be a support to educators. And for me, building relationships starts with understanding who you're dealing with. And even in a group setting, it doesn't take long to figure out how I connect with Billy, how I connect with Joey, how I connect with Mary. And when you have that, making eye contact, letting kids know you respect them, they're going to respect you in return. You don't have to roll out the red carpet. You just have to be genuine and authentic, and be willing to be vulnerable, to let them see who you truly are, not just the authoritative person that you signed on a dotted line to be, but show them who you truly are. And then at that point, now you can start establishing a relationship and a rapport that you want to get to the next level. When I started coaching, 1985. I started reciting things then that I'm now using in the mentoring process. And it's three words. It's keeping the process simple and of putting forth the maximum effort towards achieving your goals. But the most important aspect of it is the attitude. You got to have a positive attitude. And that's from the educator's perspective, and it's also from the kid's perspective. If everybody's on the same page, and I know it seems like kind of kumbaya-ish, but I do this every year. I do it year in and year out. And if I get the opportunity, I'll share a couple examples. But to me, that is the root and that is the foundation of how success is achieved for both educators and for kids.
Yeah, I think you're so right, Coach T. And someone once said to me, change your mind, change your life. And it's so true. You just change that mindset. A lot of the things that you're talking about, it can be done even with the most difficult children, students that have gotten themselves stuck. And now you're responsible for encouraging when it seems sometimes hopeless. So I would love for you to share some stories. Our listeners love to hear stories. I would love for you to share some personal stories if you can about some of the kids you've worked with, some of the stories that have really impacted you, because I'm sure you're learning through this process as well as the kids.
Christy, what's so great about that is I become a better coach and mentor with every kid I come in contact with because of what I just mentioned about learning how each kid is brought together. Now, I got to pick these stories very carefully because I will start crying on this episode because there are some amazing kids and it goes all the way back to like 1990. But I'm going to give you one of the examples of what we just talked about dealing with difficult kids. And this young man knows the story, and I've shared it many times. He was a freshman in high school, starts working out, a little chip on his shoulder. Hey, I'm all that in a bag of chips. I'm assessing him like, hey, you have the potential to be that, but you're not that. And we're having an open gym. And he started rubbing people the wrong way with his attitude to kind of be a superstar. And I pulled him to the side because I never embarrass a kid. Pulled him to the side and I explained to him, say, listen, you're coming into our world, not my world, our world. And this is how we work. We work together. We want you to become better as an individual, but we also want everybody else to get better collectively. Now, this attitude stuff's not going to work. So he leaves, he kind of makes it through that session, but I don't see him for 2 months. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess he figured, hey, this is not the place for him. 2 months later, he shows up, starts coming to workouts and open gyms. I never say a word to him about what had transpired before. He graduated 2 years ago. After he came back, he started coming every week. He started coming to help me with the 5th through 8th grade kids. And I didn't ask him. He goes, Coach, can I? I'm like, yeah, sure. So he started coming. And after he went to high school, when he went to high school, his senior year, I started going and watch him play, and I've seen him improve tremendously as a complete player, not just as an individual player. Now he texts me almost weekly, just wanting to know, hey, Coach, when can I get back in the gym? But the message in that story is some kids just need to know that somebody cares enough to get on them to let them see that there's something out there they can become better at as a person and what they could do to help other people. So that story is the one that stands out to me. Another is about a young man that spent 4 years in the JLT Fieldhouse program, always looking for affirmation. I mean, everything he did, he goes, hey, Coach, did I do that right? And I'm like, yeah, you did it right. And then he asked again, I said, yeah, you did it right. And I said, hey, how about you stop asking me? Just do it. I'll let you know if you do something that's not right. So he plays for me he doesn't make the varsity team as a 7th grader, so he plays on another team. He comes and makes the team as an 8th grader. And he's always still very passive and didn't really push himself. And he's like 7th, 8th kid off the bench. Well, this is during COVID, by the way. This is our COVID season 2 years ago. So we lose 2 starters. One broke his arm, one was quarantined. So all of a sudden, he's flushed into the starting lineup. Well, he gets flushed into the lineup 2 weeks before the tournament starts. And I'm like, okay, this is going to be interesting. And we kind of go through. This kid waited until the championship game to showcase, and I get goosebumps telling you this. He waited till the championship game to absolutely explode. He made the all-tournament team. He basically won the game for us with 2 huge 3-pointers. And afterwards, he comes to me after. He goes, Coach, thank you for helping me. I said, listen, I just gave you the tools to be successful. You took those tools and you built the success that you achieved in this championship game. So that is finding your voice, finding your confidence, and it's all about being resilient. So that example is one that really stands out to me. And I'm trying to think, there's one other, is about a young man, and this is probably the story that I love sharing. Is this young man was in the sixth grade, and he was emotionally and socially awkward. And talking with his parents, we said, yes, he's having some issues with that. I was like, okay, no problem. But he was in and out of the program, always just kind of searching to find his place. And finally, at one point, I told him, I said, listen, let's spend a little bit more time together, not just for the basketball standpoint. Let's just spend some more time together. And I would actually have him come for sessions. And I'm not saying this, I didn't charge him for any lessons. It was about him getting some quality time. So a couple years later, his mom sends me a text, and she said that he had woken up one day and told her that he no longer felt alone, that he finally found another word that described who he had become, and that word was relentless. And it turns out that's what I would always tell him. I said, man, you're playing like relentlessly. And I started calling him Mr. Relentless. So he adopted this name for himself. And but the best part is not the best part, but the part that hits me the most is he invited my wife and I out to dinner with he and his grandparents and his mom for his 15th birthday. And we're sitting there having dinner, and he steps away from the table. And at that point, his mom and his grandparents share with me that I literally saved his life, because prior to him coming in, he was suicidal, and they were afraid he was going to take his own life. But she said the mentoring and the coaching that you provided for him allowed him to find who he was, and he accepted that. And to this day, he still comes back. He's a junior in high school now. He still comes back and helps. He's not even playing high school basketball anymore, but he wants to give back to the program that helped him become the man that he's becoming now.
Okay, I'm going to need some tissues.
That
because that really just gives you goosebumps, and it makes you realize. And for those folks that are listening, when you feel like you're going in and you're loving on these kids and it's not making a difference, it is making a difference. I mean, just this three stories that you just told, you were just loving on those kids and building a relationship with those kids and being vulnerable and allowing them to be themselves, and the impact on their lives is just, it's amazing. So I thank you for sharing those stories. And you mentioned with one of these kiddos that they were a little bit socially awkward, and so it kind of got me wondering, do you ever get an opportunity to work with students that are, special needs students or autistic students? And what are those experiences like for you? I think sometimes we forget those kiddos that are maybe neurodiverse or maybe a little bit awkward. They're not like the high school football star or the basketball star, but they need that just as much as the other kids. So what's your opportunities been like with special
actually
needs
have
students?
a couple that are like that, and one of them actually probably once a month I get a Facebook message, him sending me a video clip of him working out in his driveway, letting me know he's working on his shot. And every time I went to see him play at his last game, and he kept messaging me, Coach, the time's changed. This is when it's going to be. And I'm like, okay, I got it. I'll be there. The fact that I'm willing to make adjustments to my schedule to be there for them, that is something that I really can't put into words. But to answer your question, I never look at a kid and go, I can't help you. I can help you. I can help every kid that comes through the door, because my goal has nothing to do with basketball when they walk through the door. That's their goal. My goal is to make them a better person. And I happen to know enough about the game that I can help their skills. But parents always end up coming back going, hey, their self-esteem and their confidence is like through the roof. And I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, their skills have gotten better too. And I say, well, my job here is complete, because that is my goal, and that's always been my approach. But to answer your question, is I don't look at kids that way. Everyone that walks through the door is a superstar to me, and I train and work with them as though they are going to play in the NBA or WNBA.
Yeah. And I think that's amazing. And I think that approach is what's needed with students, because I think as a society, we get in such a rut of categorizing kids into this this category or that category, or that kid's this or that kid's that, instead of just looking at them as the whole child. And it's funny, I was watching something on social media the other day, and there was a video of an autistic older gentleman. When I say older, he was probably in his 20s, but he was giving advice and hints about the way that folks treat students or children with autism or special needs, and that instead of focusing on the things that they can't do and the things that maybe aren't the same as what we deem normal, focusing on just what they're good at, their potential, the possibilities, just like you would any other kid. So I think that what you just said about meeting them where they are and not looking at kids as they're different from this kid or that kid, but just this is who this kid is, and you're going to do the same thing with them that you would do for any kid that walked through the door. So let's talk a little bit about your blueprint, because you have something. You have a blueprint for success for preteens and teens, and it's been a successful discipline, approach, mindset, and philosophy. So talk to me a little bit about this blueprint, because preteens and teens are a tough crowd.
They are a very tough crowd. So the C of Success, as I mentioned earlier, is really the foundation for how I've coached the game and mentored since I started. And I didn't realize until years later that I had established that at that point. But the C of Success, it's an acronym. It stands for Simplicity, Effort, and Attitude of Success. To me, those are 3 components for kids. Keeping things simple because their lives are already complicated enough, and yet throw in this pandemic, and it's like putting it on, I guess a frappuccino. I guess I'm trying to use my words carefully here, but you know what I mean. A double dose, a cappuccino, if you will. Anyway, espresso. But the simplicity,
espresso.
There you go, espresso. Yep. The simplicity is about keeping things simple. Don't complicate things. Your goals, your short-term goals, long-term goals, focus on those, and don't worry about the influences around you, because that's one of the things that affects a lot of kids too, is they allow social media influences as well as their personal and in-person influences to lead where they're going to go. The second component, which is effort, applying maximum effort regardless of what it is you're doing. If it's athletics, if it's any extracurricular activities, your academics, everything. Put your best foot forward and don't look back. And then couple that with the simplicity aspect of it, you're on the right path. But the last component is, to me, the absolute most important component, because no matter where you are in your life, be it now or later on, even as we sit here today, your attitude almost always determines your altitude in life. And kids' attitudes will always determine where they're going to go or where they're going to stay. And I talk so much about attitude. Now, these 3 components are tied into all of the soft skills areas that a lot of kids don't get in school. Now, that's another thing for school systems, but soft skills are not taught the way they used to be. I know when I was growing up, there's some of those things that we're taught in school, they're just not there because curriculums change. I understand that. But personal accountability, personal responsibility, setting short and long-term goals, how to communicate with adults, how to communicate with peers, how to deal with conflicts in a positive way. Those things are not really talked about. Time management is not discussed. I remember taking time management stuff in high school. They talk about how to manage your time. Nobody talks about that, because kids are now battling with how to manage their time between social media and the real world. That in itself is another challenge and a topic for another day. But those are just examples of what kids are not getting. And these are things that I teach, or what I would say mentor and teach when I'm coaching, is about each one of these factors. And the best example I can give you is the basketball team that I coached this year. By the way, if I can just plug this, if I may, we just won our 4th consecutive conference championship, 5th in 7 years. But the best thing about this team in all my years coaching is probably one of the least talented teams, but it was probably the most complete team, and had absolutely nothing to do with basketball. It had to do with all the aforementioned things I talked to you about: accountability, responsibility, communication. They held each other accountable. They held themselves individually accountable, and they never lost sight of the goal. They played the toughest game of the season without me because I couldn't be there, and I had to watch it on TV or watch on YouTube, and I was I would have pulled. This is why I don't have any hair. I pull all my hair out during that game, but that's irrelevant at this time because hopefully it'll grow back. I seriously doubt it, but nonetheless. So they win this game, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and I'm crying here. I'm like, man, you could not be prouder of these guys to go in without their coach to play like that. And then when you have a coach come and tell you that that's the best middle school team I've ever seen, this is an athletic director at a high school. And I'm like, that's the biggest compliment I can get. And he said it had nothing to do with the playing. It was how they interacted with each other, how they supported each other. And he said that goes back to the environment that you've set for them. And this is all about what I teach about that accountability. So I know I may have lingered on. When I start talking about this, I can go for days. But that's really an overview of what this program is about.
No, I love it. And how hard was it for you not to be able to
Oh, I've
watch
watched it
that
20
game?
times.
Oh my goodness. I bet you were. Well, not be there,
But
not
be
just
there.
not watch it, because I know you were watching it, but not to be there in
Right,
person.
right. Yeah, but
Oh,
I'm telling you, it
that
was.
had
But
to
I'll
be
tell you what,
tough.
these guys, I'm telling you, it is just. I want to give you this example of this team because this is really defines what I'm talking about. We had one of the players that broke a team rule this year, and he was a seventh grader, and two of the eighth graders came to me the next day to tell me about it. And my response to them was, well, what do you think we should do? And without hesitation, they said, make him sit in the bleachers and watch us run. So they're willing to punish themselves because one of their teammates broke a rule. And I'm like, man, I gotta give it to you guys. I'm impressed. I say I'm so impressed. I'm going to use that as my punishment for the team. But if you guys want to discipline him any further, that'll have to be a team decision. And so they talked to the young man. I asked him. I said, listen, I'm going to ask you a question. Now, before you answer, I need you to know I know the answer, so I just want to see if you're going to be honest with me. And he admitted that he had broken the rule. And I said, okay, so you can go sit there. So when I made these guys run, Christy, I don't mean like down and back twice. I mean, they ran, they ran, they ran. Because they wanted to be punished so that he understood the consequences of his actions. So after practice, they go in the locker room and they have a team meeting. And they come out about 3 or 4 minutes later. And they said, Coach, we've discussed it. We took a vote and it was unanimous. For our next game, he will not get to play, but he also will not get to dress out for the team. That was a team decision. And I asked him, I said, do you understand what's going on here? He goes, yes, sir. I broke a rule and I have to, accept the consequences. I said, yeah, but what's the next thing you're going to do? He says, I'm going to go home and let my parents know why I'm not going to be dressing or playing in the next game. I never talked to a parent, never heard from a parent because the team had set the standard, we had set the standards, and we lived by it. And these guys proved that during that situation. But you couldn't be prouder as a coach to see the guys take ownership of that situation.
Yeah. And so, you are on a daily basis inspiring, motivating, encouraging, especially kiddos that come into you that are having, challenges or difficulties. So, what does that look like for you? Because I'm sure there are days when you wake up and you're like, not today, not feeling it today, or you're going through a struggle in your personal life, or you're dealing with difficulty, as we all do as adults, right? But yet you still have to go in and inspire students. So, how do you apply the same advice to yourself when you wake up in the morning on those really difficult days when it's really hard to even get out of the bed for whatever reason? How do you motivate
You just
yourself?
described how I motivate myself. It's the kids that motivate me. And I honestly, and I'm not just saying this, I have those days I'm like, but when I set foot in, or either it's a phone call, it's a video call, or I'm in a gym, as soon as I make that connection, whatever is bothering me is gone because I understand why I was put on this planet to do what I do. And when you find that passion and that one thing that you do, it is what fuels you and it's what drives you. And to your point earlier, you were asking about with all the experience I have, I get better as a coach and a mentor. Every one of those experiences makes me better because, like you said, I may work, I'm having the worst day in the world, but somebody's counting on me on the other side to make them a better either basketball player or a better person. And if I don't give them my best, I haven't done my best, then I've wasted their time. And I've also cheated myself as a mentor. And that's the one thing that drives me and reminds me. And I remind myself that I do this because there's a man 50 years ago, 50 some years ago, that did that for me. And that's what drives me to do it. So there are no bad days for me. When there are, these kids are the ones that bring me back to reality.
And so, on an ending note, I want to bring this back full circle and talk about Sergeant Major Joe Louis Thompson and how he is still impacting you today and how often you think about that and the impact that he's had on
Well,
your
as I
life.
sit here and talk to you, I look up and I see his uniform sitting right in front of me. And on top of that framed uniform are the letters that he hand wrote me when I was growing up, when I was a teenager. And when I was having my first problem with girls, and he wrote a letter to me, reminding me, and I quote him, and I'll never forget this letter. He said, "Son, do you think just because you have a job and a car, girls are just going to flock to you?" So, uh, though that example, just reminded of that almost daily. But I also look at my older brother, who, by the way, is an educator, has his doctorate in education. He and I talked years ago, and he admitted, he said, had Joe Louis Thompson not come into our lives, I would be either dead or in jail without question. But now he has a doctorate in education, and then both of us are doing what Joe taught us, and which is giving back. So how every day I'm reminded of who he was and what he did for my brothers and I.
Well, Coach T, tell our listeners where they can find you, get in contact with you. Where's the best way to reach you?
Well, there's a lot of them, but I'm just going to give you a couple. CoachT'sCorner.com is my website. On Instagram, it's CoachT's_corner. Facebook is, of course, Coach T's Corner, and I also have a private Facebook group, which is Developing Tomorrow's Leaders, which I'd love for people to join that as well. And my email address is coacht@coachtscorner.com. And JLT Fieldhouse is jltfieldhouse.org, and I can be reached at coacht@jltfieldhouse.org as well. And we also have our Facebook group as well. Our Facebook page is JLT Fieldhouse.
Well, Coach T, thank you so much. You are an absolute gem, and I am just thrilled and honored that you took your time. I know that you're busy inspiring the children of the world. So I appreciate the time with you. It's been an unbelievable conversation, and we'd be lucky to have you back anytime that you have some more time. So thank you so
Christian,
much.
thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I applaud you for what you're doing as well. And everybody that is doing anything to inspire the next generation of leaders has all of my respect and utmost respect. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
And this is Christy Houle signing off for this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast.